Thanks everyone for joining us, and welcome to our session on teaching innovations in the PharmD bridging program. I'd like to first give a special thanks to Sarah DeWall, who organized our nice lunch today, so thank you to Sarah. Yes, because it's never a lunch and learn without lunch. I'd also like to make mention of a few special guests we have joining us today, so if they don't mind, I'm just going to announce and point out how grateful we are that they were able to join us. So Dr. Mario Canelio, Associate Vice President Academic of the University, is here joining us today, so we appreciate him joining us and giving us his support of this program. Catherine Newell-Kelly from the University Center of Extended Learning, and we're pleased that she could join us. And our faculty liaison, Dr. Mary Power, who we all know from the Center for Teaching Excellence, so we're very grateful for their support and their input into this program. So, as you may or may not know, we have a brief session, but we'll try to do some quick updates on the status of this program and bring you up to date on a few things that have happened since the last time you heard about it. We'll be hearing from the two course coordinators of the two courses that have already launched in this sequence, so that's Dr. Jeff Nagge and Dr. Rita Dhami. And then also from Stephanie Chiu, our experiential coordinator for the bridging program, who will discuss the clinical rotations and the recognition of prior learning program. So you've all seen this diagram at one time or another, or at least many of you have, so nothing new here, but just to point out, just to remind you, if nothing else, that admission into this PharmD bridging program is limited to University of Waterloo pharmacy graduates. So it is a limited pool. The only criterion for admission is that you graduated from our program with a bachelor's degree. There's no other restriction, although there were some prioritization criteria put into the admission process to help streamline the entry into the program. Students have 3 years to complete this flexible program once they start, and they do have up to 3 years to enroll in the program from the time that it launched. The first two courses that you see, those ones in blue, Pharm 495 and 496, started in January 2015, so they are underway currently. And they each had a limited enrollment to help account for the fact that they were brand new courses in a brand new program. The next course in the sequence, Pharm 497, will start in fall 2015, so it will launch later this year. And the next part of the program that you see at the bottom of that diagram will not start until January 2016, so winter of next year. So we have had very good application and pickup of the program so far, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Just by the numbers, we have 4 graduate cohorts eligible for this program. That's 416 alumni if we want to get specific. We had projected conservatively for budget purposes that we might get 220 in total over the life of the program, and that we think is a conservative estimate. And the readmission is prioritized by graduation year, so meaning that the first year that graduated in 2011 has priority to get entry into the program. If we have more applicants than we can accommodate at any specific time. So our applicants to date, we have 146 who have applied as of last week. The admissions are handled by Ken Potvin and the admissions committee here through a usual admissions process, although there are no people who aren't eligible to be admitted if they meet that one criterion. We have 63 currently enrolled. It was 32 was the class limit set on those first 2 courses. We had one unfortunately drop out too late to be replaced in January, but 63 who have continued throughout the winter term. And we have 67 more in the application queue who applied either for winter or spring admission who are patiently waiting to get into the program. And 16 applicants who have applied for a later entry point. So some who have intentionally said, I want to start fall 2015 or winter 2016 or whatever. People are at different stages of their lives and careers, and we have said, you know, that's fine, you have up to 3 years to start, but some of them have already sent their application in. In order to accommodate some of those 67 sitting in the waiting queue, we have actually increased enrollment in those first 2 courses for the spring offering to 48 students in each. So we will be able to admit at least 33 more for the spring term, so we're happy about that. And from an alumni relations point of view, that means all of the 2011 graduating class applicants and 2012 graduating class applicants that we've received so far will be offered admission by spring So we feel quite satisfied with that nobody's had to wait too long if they're among those first 2 classes who had the priority for admission. So some 2013 graduates will likely get in the spring admission as well, but we're not sure yet about the final numbers. The group who are currently enrolled in the winter term still have the option to enroll up until the drop add period expires for a spring term course, so we have to be careful to not exceed our limits, admitting more people than we can actually accommodate. So, but other than that, we are proceeding as planned. We have only 10 applicants so far from the 2014 graduating class, and considering that we think they may actually be the highest percentage eventually represented in the group, we think our 220 conservative estimate is actually, we will certainly exceed that number by the time the program finishes. So. We'll save questions perhaps right to the very end, and at this point I'll turn things over to Jeff Nagge, and he can talk about online problem-based learning.
Thanks, Rosemary. So I thought maybe just, I've got about 5 slides, and I thought in recognition of the outside visitors that we've got, I should start by describing a little bit about what our current therapeutics curriculum looks like for the undergrad program, because that's really what we use to inform what our decision would be for how we would take this to the bridging program, if you will. And then I'll just kind of show how the bridging program, we try to retain some of the core elements of the undergrad program and make it even a little bit better. So anyone who's an instructor here at the School of Pharmacy knows very well what an IPFC course is, because they probably have taught a course in which attendance has been decreased on at least one occasion because people are studying for IPFC exams. For those of you who are not instructors in this school, though, the IPFC series of courses, it's the Integrated Patient-Focused Care. It's organized into 9 different modules. Essentially, it really contains a lot of the core competencies and topics that are important for pharmacy education. So it combines the disciplines of pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, pharmacokinetics, therapeutics, alternative medicines, and so forth into one particular course. Again, the course is taught over the course of 3 years in 9 different modules, and there are anywhere from about, 10 to 15 hours per week of this course, so it's a very intensive course. The teaching methods employed from IPFC's modules 1 through 8 are largely based on traditional large group lectures at the beginning of the week. There are case-based discussions in large groups. And then at the end of the week, students are placed into small groups, and they do more small case-based and a little bit more self-directed learning. IPFC 9 is the final module. It's more of what we think of as the capstone therapeutics course that students in pharmacy are subject to, they might say. And essentially, it's a departure from the traditional teaching methods that we use in the other IPFC modules. And essentially, it's taught using traditional problem-based learning techniques. And I say traditional because problem-based learning is defined differently by different people. The traditional McMaster medicine version of problem-based learning essentially, in a nutshell, means there are no lectures whatsoever. So essentially what happens in this course is, instead of having all the disciplines present and having the experts from above, like Dr. Adjunct there, and telling them how to deal with pharmacokinetics, the students are placed into small groups of 7 or 8. They have a pharmacist tutor who's associated with their group. The students once a week are given a clinical case with absolutely nothing else. The students take a look at the case, they assess what they already know, so they'll read through the case out loud and decide, oh, I know a little bit about this, but you know what, there's some concepts in here I'm not familiar with. So for example, maybe with endocarditis, they'll say, I have no clue what endocarditis even is. So based on what they don't know about the case, as a group, they'll define learning objectives. And it's usually about 5 to 6 learning objectives per case. And again, there's a pharmacist tutor supervising it, but not participating. So the students then have the next 6 hours of dedicated class time over the next 7 days in order to independently research their objectives. So even though they meet as groups, they're independently responsible for their research. They come back the next week and they discuss their learning objectives, and after they've come to some agreement on the important concepts that were covered, they'll apply their new knowledge to the case, again under the supervision of the pharmacist tutor. It's really interesting because, and at the end of that, they get the next week's case and they repeat the process again over the week. I was really nervous in terms of implementing this. I've had a lot of experience as a student in PBL programs and also teaching next door at the School of Medicine. I was so nervous about implementing this. It's way different than what we used in terms of teaching methods up to that point in the undergraduate curriculum. Now I consistently get at least 10 to 15 students who on student feedback say this is by far their favorite way of learning, and they really wish that we could implement the problem-based learning earlier in the curriculum. So it certainly appears to be working in the undergraduate curriculum. So we had a strong desire. When we thought about how we're going to design the therapeutics course for the bridging program, we did toss around a couple different things, and traditionally a lot of bridging programs will use traditional lecture format. So students will watch a videotaped lecture from a distance, and then there'll be a test based on what they got from that type of thing. There may be some active learning components to it, and they might have to do a bit of independent research too, but largely it's based on that type of lecture. We didn't really want to do that. We really had a strong desire to say, look, we've already progressed the students to become much more active learners with the PBL technique. They've indicated that they really enjoy that technique. Why would we go backwards and go back to the traditional didactic way of doing it? There's also research that suggests that graduates of PBL programs possess some special skills. So I think all of us can agree that the PBL process, students are more engaged there. There is some information suggesting that students within PBL curriculum have better retention of knowledge. And as I mentioned, even graduates of the programs have better social and cognitive skills too. So again, we're dealing with graduates of the pharmacy curriculum, so there may be some advantage there. And I really think what really has sold me on PBL, to be honest, even aside from the literature, is just the strong face validity of this approach. This is real life, right? Patients are coming into pharmacies or wherever you're practicing. Their problems are often ill-defined. Information is frequently updated. So even if I did have a canned lecture on hypertension, which I'd love to do, by the way, but if I did, probably within a week, all the information that I covered with the students would be passé by that time anyway. So instead, we'd rather teach them the skills to stay on top of it by themselves. Got a problem, though. How do you use PBL, a small group face-to-face meeting, when you got students that are situated all across North America? Now, I had a fabulous idea, and I still think this is a fabulous idea. I volunteered to go to California to be the independent tutor for two of the people. Now, Rosemary said, okay, but that's going to make it awkward when you refuse to be the tutor in the northern Manitoba people. So anyway, so we thought, okay, we can't do the site visits. I still think that's a good idea. But what I should have in here, the middle solution is, how do you do PBL like this? You involve the Center for Extended Learning and the experts in there. And I'm serious, because it was great. And essentially all I've done, this is my probably third time coming up with something with them. All I do is I dream big. I say, this is what I want to do. How do I do it? And sure enough, CEL comes up with a solution. And so what we've employed in this course is the use of Adobe Connect meeting rooms. And so that's web conferencing. And again, I'm not a technical person, so I'm going to say web conferencing. I don't know if that's right. But essentially what it is, if the students all have webcams and minimum bandwidth requirements on an internet connection, they can actually meet virtually face-to-face, and you can have all 7 students and a pharmacy tutor meeting in real time with the facial cues. Some of the other PBL programs to date have suggested doing things like this, but it's all been typing and you don't get the visual cues with it. So this is definitely a marked improvement on some of the older models that exist. So essentially what happens is the groups are a size of either 6 or 7 students. Again, could be situated anywhere across North America. 1 pharmacist tutor. And instead of meeting weekly like in the undergraduate program, recognizing that these are generally working professionals, it's every 2 weeks. Okay, so in terms of the complexity and the amount of material that they need to cover, it's quite similar, probably a notch up though from what the undergrad is, a little notch up, but they're given 2 weeks to do it instead of it weekly. So there are 5 cases that they do. I've got some of the topics here, drug-induced liver disease, HIV, the testosterone supplementation has been a big hit, deprescribing in older patients. So it's not the topics, though, that are as important as much as the skill development that the students are getting from this, right? I could have picked any topics, to be honest. The only 2 I wanted there, because this cohort of students didn't have it in the undergrad, which is now embedded in our undergraduate PharmD curriculum, is the drug-induced liver disease and the HIV. The other 3 are just, again, kind of just, it's more the case that's been designed in order to help them develop their researching and critical appraisal and application skills. In terms of assessment then, some unique methodology that we're using here. So at least half of their mark is based on their participation in tutorials. We actually have a participation rubric that we used in our undergraduate curriculum, adapted a little bit for online use, but not too much. And essentially, there are 4 domains, so students get a mark 1 through 8 on the quantity of their participation. So not just how much did you talk, so if the tutorial was 3 hours and you spoke for 2 hours, that's awesome. No, it's more the quantity in terms of, was it balanced? Did you participate in each of the different learning objectives, or did you just prepare for one of them and contribute, right? So there's some language around that. The quality of participation. So you're just kind of jumping in on top and say, yeah, Barb's point was awesome. I agree. That's exactly what Barb said. I read the same thing. Or you actually, that's right. In fact, that's right. At least you're saying Barb and not, well, I agree with Jeff. But it's more that, are you reading primary literature? Are you providing insightful and meaningful contributions to the group? Contribution to group process and leadership. So again, timekeepers. Are you helping engage other people and bring them out of the shelf? You notice someone's quiet in your group. Are you trying to say, hey, I haven't heard much from Barb. Barb, do you have anything to add to this? So that type of thing. Professional behavior. And the one thing that we added to professional behavior that wasn't in the on-campus version would be, are you meeting the minimum bandwidth requirements? Are you using headphones? Because we said, please use headphones and speakers. And so if you are not using that, then your professional behavior actually gets decreased. And we actually have had to apply this at least once that we know of. And then the last thing is, so it was recognized, I wanted it to be like true PBL, traditional PBL. Essentially, that's 100% of your mark is based on your tutorial engagement. Curriculum committee was a bit nervous about using that, so that's fine. Okay, so that's cool. So we added in one other way of assessment, and that was the concept application exercise. So we thought, look, I just don't want to have an exam. Okay, so that goes back to the traditional way. So instead what we do is we came up with the idea that students will need to create their own case from their real live clinical practice. And they'll have to identify how they use the steps in PBL in order to solve that. So in other words, how did they add value to that patient's experience using concepts and skills that they learned in this particular course? And so this is the first time we're using this, and there have been some nervous questions with students. Well, how long does it have to be? And again, we're trying to it doesn't matter how long it has to be. Just tell me what you did. So we'll see how that goes. But we're kind of excited about seeing how that works. Just the last slide I've got here. So just from the feedback. So we were fortunate enough, and again, this is through CL really suggested that we do this, and it was excellent. We did a pilot. So before we had the first cohort start in January, we actually in August got 7 volunteers who were going to think about taking the course. I designed a case. I got one of my very experienced tutors from the on-campus program to do this. And it was great because it informed us on a number, and they actually did like the process. Let's do learning objectives, and they had 2 weeks to research and then come back and actually do it using the Adobe Connect rooms. We found out the technology element was going to be crucial. And so one young lady was visiting her grandmother in rural Ontario. And Steve, you'd be able to help me. So what happened? So I know there was dial-up internet connection. What was the next step before you got to so perfect. That's probably what it is. So barely more, and it might even have been a dial-up internet connection. It was unbelievably slow, and that really caused a lot of problems, not just for that young lady, but for the whole group, because again, it's like the chain. It's the weakest chain. So that really helped inform us that you need to have the bare minimums. In fact, we're actually recommending that people have wired connections then, and that's really helped. Also, we found that using headphones was essential. So like the Madonna headsets, like if you've ever used Skype with one person, you can usually get away with not using it. When you got 8 people, the quality of the audio just increased immensely. So that was very helpful to do that. The other, just one quick thing about process then. So on the on-campus PBL that we do, we don't actually encourage necessarily formal group roles. Like for example, having a group process coach, a content coach, a timekeeper, a recorder. I sort of prefer the students decide if they want to do that or not. We actually found out though by doing it online that it was essential that there were at least a couple roles. So who is going to be the person who controlled the whiteboard, for example? So you don't have 8 people trying to type something, so there'd be one person. A formal way of raising hands for students. And what was really interesting was we found it wasn't that, like in Adobe Connect, there's actually a button that you can click and you get this little emoticon that puts their hand up. They said, no, that sucks. It's better just put your hand up, because then you can see. You have webcams and you can see. So you said we just put our hand up now. So we learned a few things like that, and that's really helped the process go a bit smoother. The only feedback I have now from the actual course, which is just about wrapping up, is just anecdotal in nature. Now, I always, as a course coordinator, I'm thrilled when I don't hear anything about my courses. I've heard almost nothing about my courses. So that's a really good thing. I have sought some feedback from tutors, though, so I've heard nothing from students. There hasn't been one student feedback whatsoever from me, which is a great thing. The tutors, almost all of their feedback, and there's been 2 tutors in particular who have had some technology issues. Again, it was all solved once they went to wired internet connections and use of headphones. So far, everything's been great, and we're really looking forward to get some formal course evaluations that we can share with you at that time. So again, we'll save questions maybe for the end. Thanks for your attention, and I'll pass it on over.
So my course, which is Advanced Professional Practice, was really intended to be complementary to Jeff's course. All the students have a really good sense of what pharmacotherapy in a therapeutics course looks like, but professional practice over the course of the number of years has always taken a slightly different format. Now, as Jeff has alluded to, this particular course, we actually went with more of a traditional weekly module format in terms of online course delivery, with the essential theme being continuous professional development. I'll talk a little bit about what the concept map looks like, because it sort of ties a lot together in terms of what the whole bridging course is about and what this particular course was intended to do for the students. But again, what I was saying was the course itself, 12 sort of weekly modules where the students actually worked through content. Each week we tried to vary the content a little bit just to ensure that we were adapting it for all types of learning styles. So there is some weeks with some short lecture format. There is some weeks with some online readings. There is some case-based studies for the students to work through. And each week they've got activities that they work through, online discussion, traditional flat online discussion board posts, which turned out to be quite valuable for the students. I think the most valuable component of the course in actuality is the one-day practice skills workshop that the students actually get to come on site here to the School of Pharmacy. We hosted a one-day workshop for them to actually not only network with one another, but actually demonstrate some of the skills that we worked through in terms of content. So like I said, key theme of the course, continuous professional development. It was prudent for them to appreciate that by doing this program, this is not the end. It's the beginning of the rest of your career, and this is just a stepping stone for what you may want to do next. So, in the first week, we sort of talked about the fact that, you've accumulated a fundamental skill set in terms of pharmaceutical care for patients, but in the course of time that you've actually been out in the world and been practicing, things have changed. There's been changes in the scope of practice for pharmacists across the country. So we wanted to make sure that for all the students across the board, whether they have the ability to do this particular activity in their province or not, at least they were equipped with the fundamental skill set to be able to apply that specific skill when and if it does come to their province, which eventually things will make its way across the country. So some of the components that we actually did in our weekly modules were related to physical and lab assessment, prescribing, not just prescribing in emergency and refill situations, but this whole concept of prescribing for minor ailments. We did a whole unit on that. And then, of course, immunization and injection training as well, which was a component that was identified that some of the students in the cohorts that they graduated in didn't adequately get sufficient training on. That actually encompassed the first 6 weeks of the course, and the workshop was actually held in week 7. That gave the students an opportunity not only to sort of work independently through these modules, get a sense of what they were comfortable with, then come in week 7, like I said, to the School of Pharmacy, and do the workshop, get a chance to practice the skills, and then actually be assessed in the context of standardized patients. What that actually did in addition, which was valuable, was actually set the framework for the latter part of the course, because as the students were networking, what they found is that it wasn't so much the what to do as it was how do I implement this? What sorts of challenges are you actually seeing when you try to do this particular activity in your pharmacy? What are the workflow implications? What are the administrative implications? What are some of the components related to advocating and letting, marketing and letting, your patients know that you're actually doing these types of services? How are you asking for compensation or reimbursement for these types of activities? So again, a lot of those, what I'll call management, administrative, or leadership skills were what we focused on in the latter part of the course. And some of those elements started to come out in the workshop. So the workshop timing was actually unintentionally, but turned out to be a good timing actually in terms of how we actually structured it. The very last component, which was intended to be tie all the skills together, component was a research proposal plan. So the students were tasked with tying together any topic of their particular interest from the course, and again, something related to practice-based research, you can imagine, would tie in any of these elements. And what they were essentially tasked to do was think about taking an element from the course that they thought was valuable, that they wanted to implement in practice, or maybe have already started to implement in practice, and how would they actually evaluate it from a clinical outcome or an economic outcome standpoint, and come up with a plan to actually research that specific topic. So that essentially is sort of the concepts of the concept map for the entire course. Like I said, with the key theme being continuous professional development. The workshop was, like I said, very valuable for the students, and not only valuable for them, but very valuable for us, because it was the point in the course where we actually got the most feedback from the students in terms of how things were going. It's tough delivering courses in an online format. These are all students who, for the most part, many of them knew each other, but to have the opportunity to have a face-to-face debrief on how things were going, even informally, the feedback was sort of invaluable in terms of what we would do slightly differently the next term around. One of the interesting and most, I think most interesting piece of feedback that came is the students, and they took my course first, and they'll be doing Jeff's course after. So the interesting thing is a lot of them wanted to be spoon-fed a little bit more. They wanted the more traditional, give me more so I know what to do. And again, at this stage in the game, that's not the intention. So they'll have a little bit more of an awakening when they get to Dr. Nagge's course, which I think will help help them piece that component together as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rita. So after completing the 2 didactic courses, the students will need to complete 3 rotation courses. So as shown here. And so as Rosemary mentioned, the rotation courses will be launching later on, and the first rotation course, so Pharm 497, will be launching in the fall of 2015. So just a bit of an overview of the rotation. So basically for the competency assessments, they will be consistent with those used in our entry to practice 4th year patient care rotations, so our in-house PharmD. And in addition as well, the learning outcomes for our bridging program rotations will be the same as as our 4th year entry to practice patient care rotations. So you may have a question, so what is recognition of prior learning? Another name for it, sometimes you may hear it be called, is RPL, or PLAR, or Prior Learning Assessment Recognition. So I've put one definition up here, so I'm not going to read it out, but I'm just going to point out some key elements. So number one, it's a process. So it helps to identify and gain recognition for prior learning of a student. And that learning may be from formal, informal, or non-formal learnings. So just keep these points in mind as we continue along the presentation. So the question is, why have RPL in our bridging program? So first, let's take a look at what is our typical bridging program student. So it's a University of Waterloo alumni. So we do know what they've what was covered in their Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy curriculum. They're licensed pharmacists, typically with several years' experience out in practice, and most of them pretty much already they're working full-time jobs while they're doing this, the bridging program. And they're adult learners, which is a key thing. So some benefits for RPL are, number one, it provides a flexible and attractive program for these students, because again, they're often working full-time students, right? We do want to avoid duplication of learning as well. So, because they've had experience out while they're working, we'd like to think that they've, gained some learnings there. And lastly, most of all, we want to avoid wasting of resources, so basically time and money. And that applies for the student as well, for us, and as well the university. Because remember, we have to, drawing back to the principle of RPL, it doesn't matter where the learning took place. So as long as the individual is able to demonstrate the same level of competency as the in-class students. Or in this case, for us, our in-class students are our fourth year entry to practice PharmD students. So when we talk about integrating RPL into our clinical rotations, how do we plan to do it? What does that actually look like? So for the RPL process, we'll actually build it into the first clinical rotation course, which is Pharm 497, and there will be 3 assessment methods. So clinical experience portfolio, case submission portion, and oral defense portion. And we believe that for all these assessments, it will assist in measuring an individual's breadth and as well depth of learning. So for the clinical experience portfolio, we'll be measuring selected competencies. So essentially, it's to be supportive of the case submission and oral defense assessments. And as well, there is a practice site exposure requirement. So that's similar to our fourth year entry to practice PharmD students, where they actually need to do certain rotations in institutional practice and primary care and practice in a primary care setting. So for our particular bridging program students, they will be required to complete at least 320 hours of direct patient care in each of an institutional setting and as well 320 hours in a primary care setting. And so they can do that either one of 2 ways. So they can complete this requirement via the PharmD rotation, so within the bridging program, or they can submit evidence of their completion via the portfolio component. So if they are doing this through the portfolio, that experience must be from the time of actual graduation to the time of actually submitting the portfolio. Now, when you think of portfolio, you think of paper and probably lots of it, right? So in this case, the students will be submitting their portfolio electronically via Learn.
So I must thank the Center for Teaching Excellence.
I know Mary's here, and as well Catherine has been helping us. So as they've been giving us some good advice on this and how to go about making this electronic. So for a case submission oral offense, so these are 2 separate assessments, but they're quite linked together. So in a nutshell, the students will be required to submit written patient cases to us throughout the term, and from these cases, a few will be selected to be brought forward for an oral defense assessment. So basically, we'll ask the questions, more in-depth questions about the patient cases. So kind of what does this look like? So as I kind of put it out in the diagram here. So early on in the rotation, we'll ask the students to submit 1 case, a written case, and that's for some formative feedback. Partway through the term, so around mid-rotation, the students, again, will need to submit 4 written cases. And from those 4 cases, they'll need to, one of these cases will be submitted, will be selected for the oral defense process. And for the oral defense process, that's more like sort of a low-stakes formative oral defense. So they'll get some feedback. Now, near the end of the rotation, they'll need to submit a further 5 patient cases. And then from those 5 cases, 3 will be selected for them to defend in the oral defense. And they'll be in front of a panel of 3 assessors. Now, near the end of the rotation, none of these assessments are formative. So essentially you can say they're sort of like, they're a bit of a high stakes assessment. Now, in terms of assessors, so what type of assessors or who are we looking for to help assess the case submission oral defense? So for these assessors, they're practicing clinicians, so they're pharmacists, so Part A pharmacists, with at least 5 years experience and a significant preceptor experience. In addition, they cannot be University of Waterloo pharmacy graduates, and mainly because we want to avoid that conflict of interest, right? So that being said, for those out in the audience, if you're interested in being an assessor and you fit our criteria, please feel free to let me know. And lastly, we are measuring interprofessional collaboration. So that interprofessional collaboration we measured in all 3 assessment methods. And so a passing grade for all of the components in total is 70%, which is the same passing grade as our entry to practice PharmD rotation. And for students who fail the, I guess, the IPC component, they will need to, what they'll find is that their overall course grade is capped at 80%. So how does this all come together? We've got lots of pieces. So basically, there's the case submission oral defense, and that makes up a large portion of the overall course grade. So the clinical experience portfolio, as I mentioned, helps sort of support the case submission oral defense, and it helps confirm level of competence. So based on how they do in the portfolio, they may actually need to do additional rotations. And then lastly, for the interprofessional component, as I mentioned, if they don't pass the interprofessional component in total, like their total grade in the IPC components, if they don't pass that, their maximum score is capped at 80%, which means they actually have to do at least one additional rotation. So moving left to right, so what does this mean? So if your overall course grade, so from everything from the case submission, oral defense, clinical experience portfolio, and the interprofessional components, if your overall course grade is less than 70%, you fail the course of Pharm 497. And in that case, you do need to complete some remedial work. And essentially, we won't let you out on rotation until you actually pass Pharm 497. If you earn a total course grade of 70 to 79%, you're at a level 1 competence. So what that means is that you need to complete all 3 rotations in the bridging program. So basically, you need to complete 2 non-paid placement rotations after Pharm 497. So that's Pharm 498 and Pharm 499. If you obtain a course grade of 80 to 89%, that you're at a level 2 competence. So what will happen, that means is the student will receive a credit for 1 rotation via RPL, and they will need to complete 1 non-paid placement rotation after Pharm 497. Now, if they score a grade, if they have an overall course grade of 90 to 100%, they're at a level 3 competence, and which is the highest competence they can achieve, and they'll receive credit for 2 rotations via RPL, and they do not need to complete any rotations after Pharm 497. Now, with respect to assessors, we have 3 groups of assessors, so 1 for each assessment method. And we did that because it's possible that an individual may not want to or have the time to take part in all 3 assessments. We will be holding training sessions for all 3 assessors, mainly for quality assurance purposes, because we want to ensure that they, number 1, know what the bridging program is about. Number 2, understand the concept of RPL. Number 3, are familiar with our assessment rubrics and the whole assessment process. In a sense, we want to increase inter-rater reliability. And certainly, lastly, as I mentioned earlier, assessors cannot be Waterloo Bachelor of Science Pharmacy graduates. So you might be wondering, how, this is all great, but how did we come up with this process, how do we develop a quality assessment for our RPL processes? So, to learn about RPL, and find out more information, we did literature searches, we conducted those, we reached out to our RPL networks and organizations, and from our learnings, I just want to share some of those learnings and key points necessary for quality RPL practice. So you may have a question is, okay, with all this information, and how does one provide proof of learning and do it convincingly? So essentially, you could say that there's 3 forms of evidence, so direct, indirect, and self-assessment or narrative. So direct evidence is something like anything provided by the learner, whereas indirect is any information about the learner from another source. So it could be, for example, a reference letter, for example, from a person's employer. A narrative is basically a learner's reflection on what they've learned and what they can do. So basically, if a learner is able to provide a combination of all these 3 types of evidence, they're basically triangulating the evidence. Although, notably, sometimes it's not possible to have all 3 types, but in a sense, you try your best to have a balance to have all 3 types as close as feasible. So what makes a sound assessment? So there's 3 principles recommended for RPL to have a sound assessment. Number 1 is to have clear learning outcomes and expectations, which we do have, because basically we do have learning outcomes and objectives. Number 2 is to have a systematic process, so make sure, for example, do we have a process for how we're going to do RPL? how are we recording the results from our actual RPL process? Do we have a communication method to which we're telling the students what their result is? And lastly, there are some technical requirements, 5 of them. So the first one is validity. So does the method of assessment relate to the learning outcome? The second one is sufficiency. Is there enough evidence to provide conclusive proof of that learning, that they've achieved that competency? The third one is authenticity. So did the learner produce the work themselves, right? The fourth one is currency. So are their required knowledge and skills up to date? For example, in our case for the portfolio, we're saying any evidence that you submit for your portfolio has to be from the time of graduation up until you support it. So it can't be anything from before. And then last is reliability. So how consistent is the assessment outcomes between assessors? And some of that is us training, but also what kind of assessment tool we have. If you have 2 assessors using that assessment method, are they going to come to the same outcome? And another piece is what should be incorporated when developing and implementing a quality assessment practices in RPL. So there's 5 principles, you could say. Number 1 is assessment should be rigorous. So for example, are our assessments content experts? For example, for the case submission and oral defense process, we say they need to be experienced pharmacists, right? Are the students assessed at an equivalent level expected for in-class students? So for example, for our bridging program students, they should not be evaluated at a higher level than our 4th year entry to practice students. So no higher, but also conversely no lower. So we can't be marking them leniently. So it should be at the same level. Assessments should be transparent. So for example, if our students go through the RPO process, do they know how they're being evaluated and what competencies they need to provide evidence for? Assessments should be fair. Our process is unbiased. The assessment should be flexible because again, we're trying to capture a wide range of learning. So learning does not necessarily need to be formal learning, so it could be informal or as well. And then is the assessment fit for purpose? So basically, the purpose of the assessment tool should match the use for which it's intended. Now, with the entry to practice PharmD being the new norm, you may be wondering, okay, this is all nice, but what are the other PharmD schools doing with their bridging program? Do they have RPL? Are they including that? So this table summarizes the different programs available in Canada. So I'm just going to summarize some points. I'm not going to read it all out. So first one is UFT, you'll notice they actually don't have an RPL process for their bridging program. But some of the other programs across Canada, they do include RPL in different varying degrees. For example, with the University of Montreal and Laval, they actually have a joint program, and they allow credit for challenge for some of their didactic courses, but no RPL for their rotations. Whereas if you look at University of Alberta, they're actually planning a part-time bridging program, and they do plan to have RPL for the rotations. Whereas if you look at UBC, which again, they're planning a part-time bridging program, they're actually planning to have RPL for their didactic courses and rotations, both. Now you'll notice that I haven't included all of the Canadian pharmacy programs, and some of that is because some of the universities like Dalhousie are considering a bridging program, but they haven't made any announcements about whether they would include an RPL process or not. And then lastly, you may be wondering, okay, so what about the U.S. non-trad PharmD programs? Because those are quite popular, right, before a lot of the Canadian bridging programs came into play. So the 2 most popular U.S. I guess, non-trad programs that cater to Canadian pharmacists are ones from University of Colorado and one from the University of Florida. So Florida doesn't actually have an RPL process involved, whereas Colorado, they actually do have an RPL process for their experiential rotations, and students can actually gain credit for a maximum of 4 out of 6 rotations, so about 2/3 of their rotations. So if you had to have a takeaway, if you had to take away only one point from this, you can say that RPL in a bridging program is sort of becoming the norm. Like you can notice that for a lot of the programs, they have something in place to recognize that for a lot of these pharmacists, because they're working pharmacists, they've gained experience since they've actually graduated and since they've actually started working out in practice. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?